On the 70th anniversary of Justice Jackson's appointment as Chief Prosecutor, we get to honor his legacy with a documentary, a full-length, professionally produced documentary on the life of Robert H. Jackson. And the Jackson Center couldn't be more thrilled than to have acquired this documentary. It has been in the making for a number of years, but not altogether. There was a couple gaps in there, and due to a set of circumstances that came about last fall, we have been able to bring this project to completion, and the Jackson Center acquiring this project. And again, as I mentioned, on the 70th anniversary of Justice Jackson's appointment. I would like to take just a few moments before I turn it over to our very, very distinguished panel and thank some people for having helped us to make this happen. I would like to first introduce a couple of very, very special guests. If the Honorable William Scretany, right over here, former Chief Judge and now Senior Judge with the United States Federal Court for the Western District of New York State. And I should mention someone who is very much a part of and also responsible with others for seeing the courthouse, the United States Courthouse in Buffalo, named after Robert H. Jackson. Our mayor, the Honorable Sam Teresi. Sam is here somewhere. Welcome. Great to have you. We can't thank the city of Jamestown enough for their support, and we try to do our part too in bringing tourists to the city of Jamestown. A couple of very special guests. You look at these photographs around the wall, and the man who took those named Ray D'Addario, and we were very, very honored to have his daughter and her husband, Linda and Richard Salmon, here with us tonight. Now, as I mentioned, this project came together with some very, very generous help of a lot of foundations and a lot of people. And I would like to just point to a few, well, I'd like to point to many, but I'd like to ask a couple of those possibly to say a few words. But when we first brought this project to the Jonson Foundation and identified to them what a great opportunity we had, and then next to the Sheldon Foundation with the great opportunity that we had here to acquire a tremendous asset for the center to be used in promoting the center, Jackson, in so many ways in our educational initiative, they stepped up to help us. And so I'd like to introduce John Sellstrom, John and Carol, but John Sellstrom from the Jonson Foundation. Oh, John, would you like to say a few words?
Got a call from Greg Peterson and Jim, and they wanted to take us to lunch, so so we went and heard the story about it, and were quite impressed with it. And they had a disc that they gave us. It was not one of the finished ones, but it was sort of one that was in process. And we looked at that and thought, boy, this is something that John and Alfred would like. You know, shows early times in Jamestown. Jackson was a little older. He was about 10 years older, I think, than John Jonson. And I'm sure they probably never met. John came here in the 20s, and by that time, Jackson was in full force in practice. So they probably never even shook hands, but you never know. But at least what you'll see tonight shows some of the early days and that period in Jamestown. And so we thought that was a pretty good idea, and we thought that John would really like that because of his devotion to Jamestown and the area. So Carol and I were very pleased to make the grant to make that happen.
would now like to recognize Linda Swanson from the Sheldon Foundation. And Linda, stay sitting.
The Sheldon Foundation is invested primarily in the bricks and mortar of this building, and when we too viewed the uncut video that was provided to us, it was clear this was a different kind of asset, another kind of permanent asset to invest in. And I think when you see this tonight, you can see how many different things can be excerpted. And the fact that the Jackson Center would own all the rights to this, I think we'll be pleased of what you'll be able to do with it in the future and hopefully generate some revenue for the place. And there's so many ways this can be used for young and old that it truly should be an investment worth making. So good luck to you all.
Yeah. Of course, we also have had great assistance from Chautauqua County, and I'd like to thank the Chautauqua County Planning and Economic Development for a generous contribution. Rich Dixon is representing Vince Horrigan here tonight, and I promised Rich that I wouldn't ask him to stand up and say anything. So you're safe, Rich. I'll keep that promise. I'd like to also thank the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, the Robert H. Jackson Center Board of Directors, Douglas Neckers, and Doug Manning in memory of Ann James Manley. I would also like to thank for their continuing support, because it's that support that has also contributed greatly to the Jackson Center being able to acquire this, and that would be the Linné Foundation, the Gebbe Foundation, and the Arnold P. Holmberg Foundation. And I'd like to also thank on behalf of Lisa and Rich, who I'll introduce in just a couple of minutes, because some that were very strong contributors in the early days of bringing this documentary together, and that's the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, the federal state partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, the Community Foundation of Warren. So, I'd like to, and of course many others that will be listed in the credits, but just like to thank all of these wonderful sponsors, individuals, and foundations for their support to this project. Thank you. Before I turn the program over to our distinguished panel, I would like to also thank our hosts for the evening, David and Betsy Shepard, and Jean and Mary Fanoof. And I know you're here, and so thank them for being our hosts for the evening. And a special thank you to St. Bonaventure, too, for also sponsoring the festivities this evening. And they have had an alumni reception as well here this evening. And so thank you to St. Bonaventure University. Before I turn it over, I would also like to introduce two new members of the staff to the Robert H. Jackson Center. One of them standing right over there, and I'd like to welcome Tom Schmidt as Executive Director to the Jackson Center. And I'd like to introduce our new Development Director, Marion Beckerink. Marion, you're right up there. Please stand. Stand up. There we go. Thank you. Now, one last introduction before I sit down, and that is I would like to introduce the two people who more than anybody made this project happen through Main Street Media, and that are the producers, the writers, I could go on, but they're the ones who really made this happen, and I'd like to introduce Lisa and Rich Gensheimer, sitting right here, and I believe Lisa has a few words that she might want to say to us.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your kind words. No, we won't. We work together all the time. Okay. I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. You know, Rich and I are really thrilled to leave our documentary in the very capable hands of the Robert H. Jackson Center. It's kind of like sending your children off to college. You are going to miss them, but by the same token, you know they're going to grow and get better and make their unique contributions to the world. And I think that's what's going to happen with this documentary, and we're really excited about that. through, we've just been impressed from the very moment we heard about Robert Jackson from Greg Peterson. As you can imagine, he called one day and said, "Have I got a story for you?" And we couldn't say no. We were hooked. But it's through the tenacity and the leadership and the vision of the people on this board, the people in this community, who continue this legacy of Robert Jackson. The Jackson Center really has become a powerful force for social justice, for civic engagement, and for the rule of law around the world. And the people of this great city of Jamestown should be proud of their famous son, Robert Jackson, but they should also be very proud of this organization because of what it's doing and what it's going to do, because Robert Jackson's story has become so relevant today. I mean, you cannot watch the news, you cannot read a newspaper without seeing a connection to something Robert Jackson said or did. And I always ask myself, what would Robert Jackson say? What would he do? And I think we now, need to carry that story onward, and that's what the Jackson Center is in the business of doing. We've had the opportunity to work in collaboration with the Jackson Center. They have a wonderful archives, which is getting better as we speak. And we also had the opportunity to work in archival collections all over the country, really, to tell this important story. But, and you'll see them all the collections and all the people we interviewed are listed in the credits. But there is one person I'd really like to single out tonight and thank. It's the person who knows Robert Jackson best, and that is John Barrett. John is just Jackson's biographer, as you know, and he's a marvelous storyteller, as you'll see in the film. He was very generous with his time and even shared a couple of his coveted images from his collection with us. So thank you so much, John. I'm glad you're here, and really a great asset. And again, we're grateful to all the sponsors, to the Jonson Foundation and other organizations in the community that enabled us to finish our work and to turn it over to the Jackson Center. And we're very excited to see where it's going to go next. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I will turn it over to someone who needs no introduction, and that is Greg Peterson.
Testing. Yeah, obviously the message here, don't receive a phone call from me. Thanks a lot. Appreciate that. First of all, I am Greg Peterson, for those who've not been here before, one of the co-founders of the Jackson Center. And we're at a place where is to advance the legacy of Justice Jackson. And what a thrill it is. What a thrill it is personally for me, and certainly I speak on behalf of all the board of directors of the Jackson Center, to have this tonight occur, the world premiere of something that the Gensheimer's and I talked about well over 8 years ago. And here we are, we've come to the conclusion, and I fully expect the legacy of this will live long. And as you may have said goodbye to your child, it's coming back to you, because we still want the 57-minute version too. So don't go away. First of all, we have this special panel of folks as sort of an introduction to the film itself, and we're just honored to have the three here. I do send regrets from Harold Burson, who was somebody we had hoped. He's not well. He has a flu, so he's unable to fly in from New York City, but he wanted to be sure that he send his regrets and wished he'll be here, and of course he wants to get the film. I told him it would cost him $20, but you'll get it. Let me just introduce the panel. David Crane is on my far right. David Crane is the chairman of the board of the Robert Jackson Center. He's also the chief prosecutor for the Special Court for Sierra Leone. He was the first American since Justice Jackson to serve as the chief prosecutor of the International War Crimes Tribunal. And when you think of the recent indictment, prosecution, conviction, and sentencing of Charles Taylor, it all started with David Crane. So we're thrilled that David could join us here today. David? In the middle, Julia Craighill. Julia is the granddaughter of Justice Robert Jackson, and we couldn't be more pleased that she came up from Washington. She's also on our board. She also is the person who's heading up our implementation of our new strategic plan, and so we really look forward to her continued involvement. So Julia, welcome. Glad you're here. man to my right, we're here to advance Justice Jackson's legacy. And part of that legacy is what he did at the Nuremberg trial. And there was one person, and only one person, who was as close to Justice Jackson as anybody, and it was his bodyguard. There was one bodyguard. Now think of the current contingent of folks that travel with our officials, but here was the Justice of the United States Supreme Court, the Chief American Prosecutor, and our special guest to our right is the man who was with him 24/7 throughout the entire time period at the Nuremberg trial. And I can say that of the folks who were colleagues of Justice Jackson at the Nuremberg trial, he's it. He's the survivor. He's a one and only. So if you can get his autograph tonight, it would be very important. So I can't tell you how thrilled I am. And I also want to point out it's the 60th anniversary of the ordination into the priesthood by Father Fuchs. He was a sergeant. He ended up being a sergeant, private, then the sergeant at Nuremberg. Then he went out and went into the seminary. And here 60 years later, he is still active in the Catholic faith. And I've got one other thing. I could go on forever, but we got to ask a few questions. I'm so thrilled to have Linda here. And Linda, who's the daughter of Ray D'Addario, one of the principal photographers, and you'll see conspicuous in his absence is a photograph that I pulled down because I just, again, re-noticed it. But here's a picture signed by Ray of the Nuremberg courthouse, and though you can't see it, Ed could probably pick it up. There is Justice Jackson at the podium, and on the far right is one Private Moritz Fuchs, the only guy who was wearing a handgun, having a handgun in the courtroom itself. So there's Ray's signature, Ray's picture, Justice Jackson, there we go, Julia, your grandfather, and Moritz Fuchs. This is too cool a picture. Though I want to keep this fairly brief, and this may be difficult given the fact we've got the type of professions represented here. But David, you held an esteemed position as really being the first American since Jackson to serve as a chief prosecutor of an international war crimes tribunal. What's that really mean to you? When you got up before the first time and gave the opening statement at the Sierra Leone tribunal, did the ghost of Robert Jackson, was he with you?
Well, first, let me make it clear I don't hold myself out to being even close to that great man, but I had the privilege of being asked to seek justice for the murder, rape, maiming, and mutilation of over 1.2 million human beings. I remember as I was drafting the opening statement of my tribunal, and it took about 3 weeks, I referred frequently and was reading Telford Taylor's book, but I read the entire opening statement of your grandfather, and was moved by the words. And when the chief trial judge of the panel that I was going to give the opening statement looked at me and said, "Mr. Prosecutor, your opening statement." I felt, yes, the presence of Robert Jackson, but I also felt the ghosts of those who had been horribly destroyed in a 10-year civil war in West Africa. It's a humbling privilege. I suspect that this great man, Justice Robert Jackson, felt the same when he walked up to the podium to seek justice for the destruction of over 7 million human beings. Yes, certainly Robert Jackson was with me, standing shoulder to shoulder with me, but more importantly, the rule of law was with me when I began that opening statement.
Julia, go ahead. That's okay, yeah. That's right. The granddaughter, I think it's on. Yeah. Do you have a story, an anecdote, a vignette about your grandfather you could share?
Oh, a vignette. Oh, I didn't know I was going to do a vignette. Well, let me think. It's sort of, so much has come back while I'm here, and I was just sharing with Linda that sort of remorse of, gee, I wish I'd listened a little bit more closely. I am the product of my mother's second marriage, so I'm much younger than my cousins and my brothers. That's my excuse. I'm sticking with it. And I actually never met my grandfather, but also talking to the filmmakers about Spring Creek, I actually spent 15 summers of my life in Spring Creek, and that's where he was born. And that's really how I know him, is riding horseback with my mother and her pointing out places. Okay, here's a recollection where they used to, during Prohibition, hide the hooch, which I've gone back and I can't find it. It's a very rocky part. John Barrett probably knows, though. So, and I spoke also about how he was the only man on the face of this earth who could do perfect pancakes over an open fire. But I've also, now that I'm on the board, I'm thinking a little more deeply about my grandfather. And I think one thing that really, if I really think about what I feel about him and that was so important to me, is what a sort of fiercely independent thinker he was. And so if we're going to sort of draw analogies, I'd like to say I'm also that fiercely independent thinker. In a family of lawyers, I decided not to be one. And I went into the building industry. And so here I am back. Not only that, I spoke up during the strategic planning too much. So, of course, what did they say? You chair this, so the implement. And I've got a room of lawyers. I mean, I'm going to try to corral these brilliant minds, but we're doing it and building a stronger center in the process. Thank you.
Father Fuchs, you sat there at the Nuremberg trial, as this photograph showed, day in and day out. You heard the evidence that was being presented by many of the prosecutors, including Robert Jackson. Was there an impression, a kind of a moment in time when you listened to these crimes against humanity that this had sort of a personal impact on you? Call it an epiphany? Mic up.
That's the big one. I don't know what to say. I was overall impressed by the stature of a man who would accept the role of discerning and prosecuting these horrible things that happened, and having the wisdom to know that it's not enough to just say what we heard or saw, but to let the documents that the Nazis themselves failed to hide and were enough to convict them of that wrongness. All on the basis of Jackson's determination that law is important, the rule of law has to be followed, and something that I see is often missing in our discussions is, yes, but if the rule of law is important, and the legislators have a great burden of making the laws suitable for the development of humanity. And oftentimes we back off of that and with short-sightedness complain.
You shared a vignette with St. Bonaventure folks a little bit earlier about how impressed your boss was with your sharpshooting abilities. Why don't you share that quick story?
Well, a diversion one Sunday afternoon was when Mr. Jackson invited 3 or 4 or 5 maybe, of his fellow lawyers to go out to deer hunting. The deer over there is smaller than over here. They call them Ray, R-E-H. And each was provided with a firearm. Mine was a carbine. I'd never shot a carbine before. They were a lot lighter than our M1s that we used. They weighed 11 pounds. And as a result of our Sunday afternoon excursion, I was the only one who shot a deer. And Jackson was pleased that his guard could shoot. That's But I was impressed too, because after we got home, Jackson volunteered to dress out the deer. So it was not just a matter just for policies or highfalutin theories, but he knew country life too. He dressed the deer out himself.
That's probably a perfect segue, because I know we're here to see the movie, and the beginning of the movie puts our Justice Jackson in a place called Spring Creek, Pennsylvania, which is quite country. And as we draw closure, David, just in a word, what's Robert Jackson mean to you?
The rule of law is more powerful than the rule of the gun.
Julia?
You're a tough act to follow. Justice prevails, we hope.
Father Fuchs, as always, you have the last word.
The rule of law says you have to go all the way back, for it's the basis in the Ten Commandments. God's rules.
Amen. And for that, let the show begin. Thank you very much.